Today's episode of Dominaria's Judgment is brought to you by StarCityGames.com, where if you like secrets and you like layers, we have just a sale for you. Because until Sunday, not Monday, Sunday, September the 26th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time, you can get 15% off all Secret Lair singles over at StarCityGames.com/sale. So if you want those beautiful stained glass planeswalkers from War of the Spark, that special frame Uro that's now thankfully banned in like 5 different formats, or that Assassin's Trophy that looks like a concert poster somehow, we have all of those and more with 15% off over at StarCityGames.com/sale.
What's up, everyone? Justin Parnell here.
Along with Ryan Overturf, and we want to tell you about the single best podcast on the SCG network.
Well, obviously, Ryan, you're talking about the 540.
Indeed I am, and that is the best podcast because we talk about the best format in the history of Magic.
Cube Draft?
Cube Draft.
Every week we go over all things Cube.
We're talking about in-depth reviews of brand new cards.
The best ways to draft and think about Arena and Magic Online Cube formats,
as well as ways to play with your friends,
and ways to play with your enemies.
Also some ways to make your friends into your enemies.
And cardboard takes of a variety of temperatures.
So if you're a fan of structured nonsense,
or if you hate it,
either way, all the same, check out the 540 every week wherever you find your podcasts, and right here on StarCityGames.com.
This week's Dominaria's Judgment is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel, the #1 store for Magic the Gathering inspired apparel. Take a look at their t-shirts, hoodies, stickers, and just general stylings at coalesceapparel.shop. Then use gift code SCG at checkout to save 10% on your entire order. And seriously, I want to emphasize that sticker part. Shirts are cool, but you can send a targeted message with a sticker. Slap it on your deck box if it matches your commander, or if you really want to get inventive, find a way to slap the 3x4 sticker on your 2.5x3.5 Magic card, maybe with a sleeve, maybe with a hard case. You're inventive people, you'll find a way to make it work. So, take a look at coalesceapparel.shop, check out their product lines like Wooburg Forever and Ravnica University, and see what catches your eye. Remember, use gift code SCG at checkout to save 10%. Coalesce Apparel and Design. No one made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 24 of Dominaria's Judgment, a weekly modern podcast brought to you by StarCityGames.com. I'm Dom Harvey, I'm here with Ari Lax, and we're here to break down the initial results and impact of whatever this specific Innistrad set is called, and so far it seems like it's arriving with a bang, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly has already shown up in significant amounts in top 8s, and the archetypes that it's created are pretty darn good.
Yeah, so a lot of new stuff to get to, and also some old stuff, namely Gabriel Nassif winning the Modern Challenge. There was a terrifying moment last weekend where I thought his reign had come to an end, but order has been restored, and we can rest peacefully once again.
Yeah, it's actually doubly impressive because first of all, he got 13th in the Sunday Challenge, first in the Saturday Challenge with Living End, and I don't know if they fixed it yet, but as far as I know, even after the hotfix on Magic Online on Friday, Architects of Will is still bugged. If you target your opponent, they stack the cards.
Yeah, this is almost the most fun part of every new set release, is working out which entirely unrelated cards from previous sets got bugged as a result of something new, and trying to like reverse engineer in the spaghetti code what must have happened for that to break. So there was a time for a few days where everything that gained a specific amount of life that had you count something, like Champion of Dusk was bugged, and there was something else as well. And you really have to wonder how all of this is structured such that something like that is even possible. But that's part of the fun, I suppose.
I mean, Magic Online sometimes forgets how to count and then just keeps going. It goes through all 10 fingers and then it just adds more.
But it's trying its best, and you have to respect that.
Yeah, I mean, it sure does some fun stuff, and if you want to even say anything about Arena, listen, Arena has had like 2.5 years and already like explodes because of the graphics. Anytime you have a program that you've been pulling along for 20 years with quarterly or more rapidly updates like this and entire engine reworks and all this stuff like this is going to happen.
Yeah. When you talk to some of the young grinders, that it's easy to get into this sectarian conflict over which of Magic Online or Arena is better designed, and you don't have to choose. The answer can be neither of them. That is a perfectly valid response, and we see more and more confirmation of that every day. But yeah, Nassif back on top once again with Living End, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I suppose. Although, having said that, the most recent challenge win of his before this was with Murktide Region. So I guess we are just hopping around and proving that he can just dominate with literally anything at this point.
Well, I think those are two of the like consistently good I think there's like 4 decks that I would label consistently really good in Modern. And those are Murktide, Pure Steel Paladin, and then both the Cascade decks. And, they have like off weeks, but they've been good for the last like months. Azorius may prove itself as a kind of newcomer. Maybe you could lump all the Rakdos decks in if you wanted to count like Jund and Mardu and all that stuff. But, if you're rotating between those and winning, you probably got a good handle on the format. And I do want to make one quick note. The Living End deck has not changed a lot. But Fairy Macabre is picking back up on the sideboards, a bit less endurance, and I'm a pretty big fan of that. Having played the deck a bit, I actually have found that the raw card quantity can matter in a lot of spots, and throwing away a card to endurance is not ideal. And it kind of, I know I talked about endurance being just like a good card in the Footfalls deck, but you're not really like in the market for good cards in Living End. You're in the market of doing Living End stuff, and you're a little more free to just board in Fairy Macabre against something like Elementals without costing you a ton of resources. Just have that so that if they try to like bin a Solitude and do some nonsense, you can just cut them off.
There. You don't really have these small scrappy games with Living End where you're trying to get it done with an Endurance and a Brazen Borrower, and maybe your one piece of interaction is backing that up, where that's a very common play pattern for the Rhinos deck. Whereas with this deck, you really are going big or going home in that sense. And it's easy enough to go big that the deck is consistently very good, and someone like Nassif can do well over and over again with it. But there is a fundamental difference in approach there. The other thing, too, is if you're having to pitch a green card to Endurance, a lot of those green cards are Charlotte's Agent and Violent Outburst, i.e. your payoffs where you need to draw one copy of these in basically every game you're going to win, and often you need to draw several copies to fight through disruption, and you just don't really have the green cards to spare to be able to throw those away. Whereas Fairy Macabre is a fake black card to picture your other fake black card in Grief as well, so bolstering that count on top of being a less conditional piece of interaction. And sometimes you can always just turbo Living End too. Like if you know you're going to be going off and adding 10 power to the board, well, make that 12, and 2 of that has flying now, so maybe that gets you across the finish line.
Yeah, it gives you a lot more modality, and the being a black card is certainly worth noting, especially because there's not a lot of overlap between like decks you really want Fairy Macabre against and decks you really want Force Negation against. You're likely to be cutting one and adding the other, which then means that you need less blue cards, probably want more black cards for Grief. And like you said, there isn't really like an Architects of Will has good colors and technically does stuff card that overlaps with Endurance there. So
yeah. And it might be weird to say that this new set is having a big impact on a weekend where first and second place in these challenges are 2 decks which I think between them have no cards from either of the last 2 sets, but we're saving most of the decks that really did pick up a lot for our main segment here, because there's enough there for us to dissect. So we're mostly going to be relegating those decks for now and just talking about some of the more consistent performers and also maybe some of the out of left field decks that don't really rely on the new cards in the opening here. So Nassif in first place with Living End, second place, fairly stock list of Murktide Region, and then Canister, of course, back here in third with Elementals featuring 4 copies of Moldrifter in the main deck. So I remember the evolution of this quite well, because this started as, oh, hey, wouldn't it be cool if I added a Moldrifter to this deck? And then that very quickly became 2, and sometimes a third would sneak into the sideboard if he was feeling particularly indulgent on the day. And now we're just at a full 4 in the main deck here, really making a bold statement.
Well, I think you can point this directly at the selection of the cards in the deck that aren't Elementals. Notably that there are more of them. And as you add more of those to your deck, you start running into the spots where you are going to dead end off your Risen Reef chains into cards that are lands or non-elementals. And by putting Muldrifters in there, you can like build up a buffer of additional cards in that chain by Muldriftering, and then just like actually go full on off once you start ephemerating. So it lets you build a more interactive version of it. Not by a lot, but by enough.
Yeah, we're seeing a reduction in Flamekin Harbinger here. I know Canister has never really been a big fan of that card, and I think for his list on the Sunday Challenge, he actually just cut that card altogether and tried playing the deck without that. When I tried that myself, I did find myself missing the Harbingers. I think you do want those still in some quantity, but Muldrifter made more sense the more I thought about it, where in a deck where so much of your early interaction relies on pitching 2 cards, where I guess in the case of Fury, often you're getting at least 2 cards back and sometimes even more. But when you have more divinations in your deck, it's easier to just fire off a Solitude, going down a card, knowing that you can recoup that before too long. Also, we're seeing the format slowing down a little bit. Hammers dropping off a bit. Some of the fast linear decks are less popular. And we're seeing more of not just the more grindy Ragavan shells, but also Blue-White Control really picking up this weekend in a big way, and more on that before too long. And Muldrifter's the perfect card to have there. And then just in terms of what the deck is trying to do, one thing that I found with the deck a lot is it was easy to get stranded with an Ephemerate in your hand that wasn't really doing anything. And in particular, if it was a matchup or just a game state where you were having trouble lining up Solitude or Fury, or those cards just weren't really doing anything for you, at that point, Ephemerate often didn't have a clear use, whereas with Muldrifter, you have the natural 1-2 punch of evoke Muldrifter, go to Ephemerate it, and then even if they have the removal spell, it doesn't feel like a blowout because you're still, up cards on that exchange, and you can find a way to convert what otherwise would have been a dead Ephemerate there. And then there's also, with Canister's use of Utopia Sprawl, which is, I think, stock at this point, but he was the one who really pioneered that in the deck. You have that more natural curve of turn 1 Sprawl into turn 2 Evoke Muldrifter to set up for, turn 3 Omnath or turn 3 Risen Reef, hold up Ephemerate, that kind of thing. So even though it seems like a somewhat slow and clunky card, I think you can get away with that more now. It's what you want more now, and also just how the deck is constructed. I think it makes a lot of sense there.
Yeah, it is interesting to see this deck bounce back a ton. I think some of it is cutting Torpor Orbs from the sideboard, and I think we'll move into the next deck and talk about this a bit. I think a lot of it is just that Cavern of Souls is really, really good right now.
Yeah, so previously that card was only really good against the Murktide decks, and to the extent that it messed up your mana base sometimes, and Cavern of Souls and Utopia Sprawl is not a match made in heaven, and when the deck had Ren and 6 for a brief period, often Cavern would get in the way there too. And so I started to think of how many of these can you afford to shave? But now Murktide is back in a big way, and Blue-White Control is vying for a spot in the top 2 of the format. And at that point, you actively want to be a Cavern of Souls deck. That is a good reason to be in an archetype. And there isn't really another good candidate. So my article last week for Star City Games was ostensibly about the various zombie decks with Champion of the Parish that you can build in Modern, but there was also a larger discussion there of why are tribal decks struggling, and it is hard to find a deck that isn't a tribal deck that makes good use of Cavern of Souls, especially with Primeval Titan nowhere to be seen at this point. So Elementals is, I think, just a good deck in general. It's managed to weather the storm there in terms of surviving the factors that pushed out other tribal decks. And also, hey, if you want to be playing Cavern of Souls, this is how you do it.
I think I would describe it, I think it is good, but it's on the fragile side of good. Not like extremely so, but enough that it is something you can push out of the way if you want to. Which is why we saw it disappear. But yeah, I agree. It is a very powerful deck that is going to be ringing around the format for a while. I have some disagreements later about that can't find another good Cavern of Souls deck, but we'll get to that. Let's talk about Azorius Control, because it is everywhere in these results.
Yeah, this is the big story of the weekend, I think. So the fourth place list from Saturday, 3 copies of Memory Deluge in the main deck, as well as a copy of Sunset Reverie, joining another one in the sideboard, and even a copy of Fateful Absence finding its way in there, which, especially if you think there's going to be a lot of Teferi movers, both small Teferi and big Teferi, That's a nice tool to have access to, and just in general in the format, right? Like we mentioned the Ren and 6 Urza Saga Jund decks as one of the big winners of the past few weeks, and against that matchup, you really want a card that can hit Ren and 6, can hit a Tarmogoyf, and so on, ideally at instant speed to pair with your Teferi Hero of Dominaria or your other instant speed interaction. So just a nice addition to the toolbox there. But yeah, I think all of these various new tools, they take a deck which already was putting up results and starting to be refined more and more, and really have pushed it solidly into the top tier of Modern.
Well, Dom, you're spoiling the main topic a little bit. But I do want to talk about the actual other changes that have occurred with this deck more, because it looks like the Bill Sive version of this deck has kind of become the more dominant version. We're seeing a lot more Solitudes, a lot more Chalice of the Void, whereas previously Wafo would be more on like 0-1 Solitude, 2 Chalice. We're seeing a lot more 3-4 Solitude, 3 Chalice in the main deck. And really becoming like a real hate deck. And I think the addition to Solitude is really important. The list of this deck that were heavy on Chalice but light on Solitude had an issue. I mean, I guess we were talking about Fateful Absence briefly, but they had an issue covering the full range of creatures. They were kind of just built to combat creatures that cost 1 and 2 because Lurrus was everywhere.
Yeah, and Solitude just covers basically everything up and down the curve, on top of just being a good finisher, which also opens up Kahira the Orphan card as a companion here. This may actually be the best Kahira deck for the time being now. There's competition for that title.
Yeah, I think that I've definitely had opponents get too excited to put Kahira into their hand with this deck. But I think that the card does add a bit of an important dynamic. I think that being able to pump your Solitudes a little does matter when you're trying to actually close out a game. The creature Kahira doesn't matter a ton, but like it's so free and it is functional enough that like you got to play it. I don't think adding Snapcaster Mage to this deck is worth it.
And I think the emergency buyout of sometimes you really need a white card to pitch your Solitude and you just pick it up for 3 mana it's not a great rate, but if you're about to die to something wearing Colossus Hammer or whatever, then it'll do. You'll happily make that sacrifice. And in particular, I think Solitude in a deck which, now that you have 4 Archmage's Charm and 3 Memory Deluge, and it's hard to overstate how good that card is, and not just finding the specific tools that you need, but just putting you up on cards over the course of a game where once you have all this good interaction and sweepers and Chalice of the Void and so on, you can prolong the game to the point where you're reaching 7 mana, you're flashing back Memory Deluge, and at that point, it feels so hopeless from the other side as that phase of the game creeps ever closer. It is easy enough to go down a card on an exchange with Solitude and still feel perfectly fine with that, because you know you will be making up for that and more if you can get the game to a certain point.
Yeah, I'll also shout out Hall of Storm Giants as another card that really pushes that inevitability. I remember having the feeling, you play against Celestial Colony for years and you get into the spot where like no one had a ton of cards, but the blue-white player could like clock you out in like 3 or 4 hits. It's pretty often happening in 2 shots with their land these days.
Yeah, and the Ward 3 on the Hall of Storm Giants, it seems like by the time they're activating that card, you should be able to pay for that without too much trouble, especially if your removal is something fairly cheap, like a Fatal Push or so on. In practice, though, having to hold up 4 mana or more just to threaten that possibility means it's so hard to actually use the rest of your mana in a useful way. So you get into this weird holding pattern where the control deck has Hall of Storm Giants. You can't afford to take a hit from that, so you have to maybe, instead of using mana on your own turn, you just pass the turn holding up your removal spell, and then they read that situation for what it is and just do something else, or they pass the turn back to you, and that back and forth usually favors the control deck, which at any point could draw Memory Deluge or Teferi or so on to put the game away.
Yeah, I would say more than favors. It is excessively brutal. I also think Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, has benefited a lot over the last weeks. I know you mentioned Murktide coming back, but it does feel like in general, the Unholy Heat share of the metagame has dropped a lot in favor of Prismatic Ending. And that is, These decks, a lot of these decks just don't have 5 colors for Prismatic Ending, and paying 5 mana to kill a Teferi is like not a good prospect at sorcery speed. It was the 1 mana interaction that was the issue. So that card has gotten a lot better and is still really, really good.
The other thing there too is that Chalice of the Void, right? If Unholy Heat is the big issue, at some point you can Chalice on 1, and then Teferi it goes from being quite vulnerable, more so than it ever had been before MH2, to almost indestructible now if you have any good ways to protect it. And that's another place where Solitude comes in, where it's much easier to tap out proactively for Teferi, knowing that you have at least one layer of protection, and if you get to also hold up Counterspell or something else, then that's a second layer there as well. So every part of the deck here works together in a really nice way. We should also touch on Sunset Revelry quickly, which is, it kind of does what it says on the tin, but I think the first time you're on the receiving end of that as an aggro deck, let's say, you really appreciate just how brutal that card can be. In particular, against the Ragavan decks, where that is a place where a deck like this can struggle sometimes, especially on the draw. And against Ragavan, if you're able to Revelry, make 2 creatures, 2 good blockers for Ragavan, gain the life back, maybe even draw a card sometimes, that can bridge you to the next phase of the game by itself.
Yeah, well, there's also a kind of interesting dynamic going on there that pushes it even more in favor of that working out. And that is the lineup of Ragavan against Prismatic Ending. If you don't have the exceptionally early Ragavan against Azorius, you're almost incentivized to hold it up to dash in with. And at that point, you're walking right into the hand size clause on Sunset Revelry, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, and also there's that pincer between Prismatic Ending and Chalice of the Void too, where if you're holding your Ragavan, trying not to deploy it into sorcery speed removal, then it becomes that much more vulnerable to possibly a top deck Chalice of the Void.
Yeah. There's a lot of tough questions to ask with that deck. But this deck does struggle with Cavern of Souls, just for a lot of reasons. And let's talk about the hot new deck that is what I think a very good Cavern of Souls.
Okay, let's hear it.
Okay, so I wrote my article about this, and this is Mono Red Eldrazi, which I believe started off as a Twitter meme from the Modern Leagues, and in the last 4 challenges has a finals and a win. This deck's actually good. It's not a joke. Even if the deck really does look like a joke, because it's just like 4 Ragavan lands, and like the entire right side of the curve is tipping the deck all the way over off the screen. It's all the Eldrazi stuff you'd expect. It has the like very powerful mono red cards of like Ragavan, Bonecrusher Giant, and Fury. Pretty key upgrade to like previous lists where you get to play a bunch of removal that also attacks your opponent. And then you kind of fill it out with like chalices and some spot removal.
Yeah, and this reminds me of how the Gruul decks went from being this running joke where you could actually lock your opponent under Blood Rune or Molten Rain some of their lands, and you just weren't doing anything, so they would have time to come back. And then those decks saw this real glow up where suddenly they just improved their card quality massively across the board and really became a force to be reckoned with. And I think this mono red Eldrazi shell is going through the same transformation here, where it would really love to have Syrian Spirit Guide back, but it has another monkey as a replacement, which is quite happy with.
Yeah, and it's not a perfect deck. It's got some notable flaws. Like it does have this issue of like it's 24 lands and like 36 1-for-1 spells if your opponent lines things up with your Eldrazi. Like I guess maybe they take an extra card off of the Reality Smasher, but like you don't have an opt and you don't have a divination. Like you just got what you got. And if you draw like it's the classic red mid-range issue where it's like if I draw 4 or 5 lands this game, I'm set. And if I draw like 3 or like 7, we're going to start to have problems. It tries to do a little bit of work, but you could probably do more on that end. It also like has some issues if you start seeing stuff outside like the very narrow interaction window. Like if people just start like playing Snapcaster Path again, you'd probably have issues. It's good for like this moment in time. It's also worth mentioning that it's a Blood Moon deck out of the sideboard, which is really, really nice. Something you don't see a lot are Blood Moon decks that are like Blood Moon plus like reliably castable good threats. And you when you see that, it's like a whole different thing. Like you have this experience a lot in Modern where like a random deck will Blood Moon you, and then like their other 7 cards like don't matter because you still get to cast like a Tarmogoyf and 2 Lightning Bolts. But like this deck's cards all matter. So like when they Blood Moon you and you can only cast a Tarmogoyf and 2 Lightning Bolts, like you're just gonna die to all their cards.
Yeah, it's rare to find a Blood Moon deck that's also a good Chalice of the Void deck, but this one I think hits on both counts there. Does this want to be a Gemstone Caverns deck? Like it feels like in a deck that really wants to be accelerating out Chalice and has a billion different 3-drops. It feels like, you know, I guess with Blood Moon, you do want to have some amount of basic waste, but I always feel like with these decks, and maybe just with Magic decks in general, Gemstone Caverns is a somewhat underexplored card.
I don't actually like it in this deck because I think your raw land count matters a lot, at which point like the legend rule is devastating. Also, each of your colorless lands matter a lot. Like you're trying to get a lot of value extracted from your lands. So I don't think it adds a ton to the deck. You could play like one, maybe, but like all the prismatic vistas matter because you need to be able to have your wastes under your own Blood Moon. Like you can't cut Ramanap runes. Cavern is huge value and like an important piece of the metagame. Your Eldrazi temples are 2 lands for 1. Like at the point that you're adding that, you're like cutting a Shadow Skull Smashing or something. I don't know how good that is or isn't.
I was thinking maybe the first Gemstone Caverns goes a long way, but not the back in the Spirit Guide days, you would sometimes see like 4 Spirit Guide and then 3 to 4 Gemstone Caverns. Don't think that approach is really tenable when you don't have the first half of that equation anymore.
Yeah, you don't really get to go off.
Speaking of going big with blue-eye control decks, what if we just made our deck bigger? How does that sound?
Oh no.
So you've heard the groan here. Let's talk about 80 card blue-eye control here. We have a 1 Yorion in the sideboard and then 20 additional cards in our main deck. So this list from Curryvore in the Saturday challenge, this actually looks very different in some ways from the more instant speed list that Bill Sive made the top 4 with, and which was all over the challenge on Sunday. So this is more of a blink focus deck, I suppose. So 4 Wall of Omens, 4 Restoration Angel to go with those, and also our 3 Solitudes and 3 Vendilion Cliques. We've got 4 Spreading Seas in the main deck, which is a great card right now, but also something which you can bounce and replay with Teferi to get an additional card. You can blink with your Yorion. And then we have to fill out the spells as well here. So 4 Dovin's Veto in the main deck here, really posing the mirrors. And I guess anyone brave enough to be playing some kind of combo deck alongside the stock 4 Counterspell for Archmage's Charm.
I really like Dovin's Veto. I think the place you want it is against actually the Cascade decks, because they're often trying to like end turn Violent Outburst. Oh look, I can force a negation back. You just veto, it's over. It's done. Like they can't do anything about that. It's the same concept as the Flusterstorms, just a little more assured. So I like that. I don't like this 4 Supreme Verdicts, like a million creatures kind of stuff going. Like I know people have done it for so long, but every time I see the 4 Resto Angel, 4 Supreme Verdict thing, it just like breaks my brain.
I don't know if Vendilion Clique has aged all that well. It is fun to see it alongside Brazen Borrower, which is the card it was most often compared to during the Throne of Eldraine spoiler season several decades ago now. But I don't know if we want to be emphasizing that. Likewise with Kitchen Finks in the sideboard here. This is almost like a 2012 Blue Eye Control list in some ways. It has been sent forward in time for 2021.
Well, when you have to add 20 cards to your deck, you got to dig up some. I don't know if you do.
I don't think that's a valid excuse anymore.
Yeah, I don't know what to say about that deck. I will see if people want to play more of it. It probably does mush the Eldrazi deck. Flickering Solitude is kind of a problem there.
If I was going to add 20 cards, I would want one of them to be the 4th Solitude, just for the record.
Yeah, that's true. Just to close out on the Eldrazi deck, I will note that it does have some issues against Urza Saga, which is probably another reason it's good exactly right now. But I don't see us going back to Urza Saga. Well, maybe. I don't know. We can talk about
another card which has quietly kind of dropped off a lot, where Hammer was really the only prominent Urza Saga deck. I guess also the Jund Saga decks, but both of those have fallen off pretty sharply in the last week or two. And I would never count those out. I think you're going to see some amount of the Murktide factor with those, where people assume the deck is dead and buried for whatever reason and come up with their own theory to explain that, and then you see 2 copies in the top 8 of the challenge the next week. I don't think those decks are going anywhere, but yeah, we are at maybe a historical low point for Urza Saga. So, and if it does come back, you do have some amount of coverage there via Blood Moon in the sideboard, on top of all the other things that card can do. But just closing out on this Yorion version of Blue-White, typically that's the direction you go when you think you need to go bigger against other mid-range or control decks. And I think in general, Yorion does do that, but I don't know if this approach necessarily does. And if we're looking to maximize Yorion, I think Dress Down, like in conjunction with Teferi Time Raveler, especially if Saga comes back, would be an option worth exploring. But I don't know. I think if you take this list and iron out some of those inconsistencies, this is an approach to keep in mind if more and more people start hopping on the blue-white bandwagon.
Well, I do think Resto Angel is really good in Azorius Mirrors for the same reason I was saying that the Azorius decks, as they're constructed now, couldn't really defeat an Endurance. Like, it's the same card. It just has, like, the properties of, like, big mana cost and flash. So, like, I don't think you're in the worst spot there, especially, like, if you're going to push against people's Planeswalkers. I will note that Yorion plus Dress Down, I think, is less of a combo than
I mean more in conjunction with Teferi Time Raveler.
Oh, sure. I mean, you can't really Yorion and Dress Down or anything like that.
You need some amount of the Wall of Omens Spreading Sea stuff, but like at some point, drawing 4 cards with your Yorion instead of 3 doesn't actually move the needle there, and you might want an effect which is similar for some other uses, but just, you know, more impactful across the board.
That's fair. I do want to briefly touch on, you know, moving away from these decks. We've seen more Yoggmoth in these. I guess there's 2 decks in the Sunday top 8 that I want to talk about as things that are benefactors of like the way the metagame is shifting. And that is a Yoggmoth deck in 4th place and a Amulet Titan deck in 6th place, which, like, these are the same decks. You like, I guess there technically is a new card in the Yoggmoth deck. We can get to that later, whatever. But like, this is all Unholy Heat, right? Like, that these decks are here because that card is a little bit gone.
I think some amount of it is just, I recognize both of these names as players who play their particular archetype religiously and are often seen doing well with them. So maybe it is succeeding in an otherwise hostile environment, or maybe it is these decks are well positioned. And in the case of Yoggmoth, we've been saying this for the past few weeks, is, oh look, it's another top 8 by Yoggmoth, and why aren't more people picking that deck up? In the case of Amulet Titan, that went from maybe the consensus for early best deck post MH2 to literally not appearing at any point anywhere. Maybe that's going to start creeping back in again, and you can make adjustments for the direction the format's taking. So, you know, more Cavern of Souls perhaps against the blue-white decks and so on. Being a Saga deck is very good there. So, you know, maybe that's the hole that you're looking to exploit. But yeah, I think if, like with Amulet in particular, you don't really want to be trying to race the hammer decks, and the Murktide decks between Unholy Heat, the blue reactive cards, and Blood Moon, and a fast clock, and even Murktide Region, a lot of the time, it was just hard to slog through all of that. So maybe there is, you know, an opening here for those decks to come back again.
Yeah, I think it's I would point towards the other assorted Unholy Heat decks more than Izzet, because like Izzet's numbers are, you know, about, they're not like where they were at like the 1 week that it was at its peak, but they're still floating around. But like the stray Unholy Heats that you run into out of like Jund or whatever are not so big anymore. But yeah, also that is, you mentioned recognizing the name, that is House of Mana, the player who was first seed in the like showcase playoffs with Amulet out of nowhere that 1 week when Amulet was nowhere else to be seen. So yeah, they have played that deck a lot. Yeah,
it is worth noting how the base Rakdos decks, I guess, whether it's Rakdos, Mardu, Grixis, just really nowhere to be found this weekend. And if we see that again the following week, maybe we start to identify a trend, but something to keep in mind at least.
Yeah, they are floating around the events, I think. Like, I play against them a lot in leagues over the course of a week, and then I just don't see them anywhere.
Yeah, a decent amount of burn this weekend as well, just to close out on those results. Is that, I know we mentioned this a few weeks ago, burn is a deck which always is lurking on the fringes, waiting for its moment to pounce again. Is there some factor which is causing it to be especially good right now, or is it just, these things happen sometimes?
No, I think it is actually very good right now. The specific reason I would cite I think burn is getting better with the new set, and we'll possibly go into that a little bit. But I think that burn's initial issue was that it struggled, like the Urza Saga decks just kind of had like the initial ones just had like a million food tokens and could kind of push it out, and those are gone. The mana bases are getting a little greedier. Like we did talk about the rise of like Jund and Mardu for a couple weeks, and it crept back in there, and now we're seeing decks like get a bit slower. And burn has always been a really good deck to exploit whenever the format decides it wants to add a turn to all of its everything and then not play burn hate cards. So I do really like burn right now. I mean, it's not even like preying on Tron anymore. I think it's just
so that's a lot of old stuff that continues to do well and has proven itself time and time again. Should we talk about some new stuff?
Yeah. Let's take a quick break and we'll kick it over to some Innistrad Midnight Hunt. If you are looking to sell your Magic the Gathering cards, it's never been easier than with StarCityGames.com. Make the best of our 30% store credit bonus and the fastest turnaround time in the industry when you use any of our 4 simple ways to sell located at StarCityGames.com/sell. You can check out our buy list, box up your cards and send them our way with the ship and sell program. Come on in to the Star City Game Center in Roanoke, Virginia for that personal touch. Or if you have everything, 500,000 cards, you want to store and you want to do some bulk, we'll come to you. And seriously, when we're talking about these large collections, Star City does mean they will come to you. The list of places goes from Ohio to New Jersey and elsewhere. Like, seriously, I've driven from Ohio to New Jersey. That is not a short drive. So head on over to StarCityGames.com/sell, that's SELL, for more details on all these great options, and maybe clear up a little space in your life for your next project, even if that happens to just be even more Magic cards or another Commander deck.
Okay, so let's get into some of the Innistrad-fueled decks and strategies that showed up this weekend, and the one card that really made a name for itself here in week 1 has to be Faithful Mending. Faithless Mending? One of the two. There we go.
Faithful. Yeah, there were 2 decks in the Saturday Challenge Top 8. There was 2 names you probably will recognize. There was Aspiring Spike playing some good old Arclight Phoenix with Faithless Mending, or Faithful.
There we go.
Faithful Mending. I'm going to fix that. Faithful Mending. And there was Spider Space playing Esper Reanimator with, again, Faithful Mending. Both those decks are very good, I think. Have you gotten a chance to play with them? Because I've gotten in the trenches a bit with both of them. I think
I've played against the Phoenix deck a decent amount. It's certainly the flavor of the month at the moment. Aspiring Spike has that effect, certainly in the modern leagues, where the same way that Croaky does on Arena, perhaps, where they just need to say the word and suddenly that they can warp the metagame by themselves. I think the Phoenix deck is very good against decks that are kind of similar to it, if that makes sense. So against Murktide or the black Ragavan decks, which are not doing well in the challenges, but are still apparently everywhere in the leagues, that's where you really want to be the Phoenix deck. I think the deck is structurally somewhat flawed when it comes to, it's fairly threat light, and the obvious question, which Aspiring Spike's chat asks time and time again, is, don't you want Dragon's Rage Channel in this deck? Don't you want this other tertiary threat? And his response was that, that just makes you a little weaker to removal and a little more exposed to graveyard hate. And while that's true, I feel like that's already true of the 8 threats that the deck gets to play. And so in particular, the new breed of blue-white deck that has a bunch of Solitudes and Chalice of the Void and, sideboard Rest in Peace and so on, seems like kind of a nightmare for this Phoenix deck. And like the card Endurance seems like a disaster as well. I think if your opponent can attack the graveyard or attack your recursive creatures in a way that they can't come back, then the deck does have issues. If your opponent can't do that, then you're off to the races, and the deck has a lot going for it in that capacity.
So that's a similar impression to what I have of the deck. I would describe it as if you took the most, so, you know, we're talking 3 years ago now when people were playing Hollow One versus Arclight Phoenix. And if you took the most Hollow One parts of the original Is It Phoenix deck, like the explosive double Phoenix draws and stuff like that, and you merge them with the most Phoenix parts of the Hollow One deck, where you were like producing a couple fast, like free, you know, when you like have like Gurmag Angler and a Hollow One and a Lightning Axe in a game. Like that's kind of how this deck plays with the Demi Liches and the Arclight Phoenixes. It has issues. So I actually agree with Spike for a different reason. I literally don't think you can cut any of the like linear stuff from the deck. Like you need every card in your deck to be a cheap spell to support the Phoenixes and Demi Liches, because you do need to generate those 4 spell turns. In sideboarding, I have been like very hesitant to even board in like all of my Alpine Moons when I'm not like, I haven't played against Tron with it yet, but like if you end up in these spots where you're like, well, I just don't want to put a card I might not be able to cast into my deck. And you look at the sideboard and it's really like that. And you don't have, as a result of this, you do not have access to like a generic answer like a Counterspell, which leaves you open to a lot of stuff that could just happen to you. I found the deck to be better against like literal Rest in Peace, because Prismatic Ending is really good. But I've had issues with the, you know, you mentioned the Rakdos deck. The Jund deck that's like Urza Saga and all the other stuff has been a problem, just because like you can handle like a true Urza Saga deck, like you can wear tear it, but like you can't, like when you're like, I have to beat like Ragavan Luris and like have to wear tear the Urza Saga, you get stretched in a lot of directions. It's not like horrific because you can still power through with your cards, but like that and the fact that they represent like a fast Soul Guide Lantern or Neil Spellbomb off the Saga.
Yeah, the two other things that stood out to me was, first of all, this deck actually is quite poor in the low resource games that come up a lot, where you don't really have any ways to go up on cards other than you're making these recursive threats that you've previously discarded to a Faithful Mending, let's say. You know, you don't have the kind of stack of expressive iterations and other cards to go up on cards that way. You don't really have ways to kind of get back to parity in that sense. And so if you're going down a card to Faithful Mending or Faithless Salvaging, is that? Oh, okay, good.
Yes, that's correct.
So you're doing that and you're kind of losing a card on all of these exchanges. And then if they can deal with the first wave, sometimes just assembling 3 or 4 spells for the second wave is easier said than done. The other thing is, even though Faithful Mending is a fantastic card, and certainly an excellent card in these grindier games, if speed is the only thing you care about, it is markedly worse than looting there, where it is pretty difficult to get those turn 2, or sometimes even turn 3 Arclight Phoenix turns if you're having to do other things at the same time. Same thing with Demolic, where you know, you get these awkward sample hands sometimes where you have several copies of that card and and this is almost the Hollow One aspect, right? You're like one piece away from just dropping 12 power on the board for free, but without that one missing piece, you literally can't do anything. And so you end up kind of in this all or nothing play pattern where you hit the nothing a little too often for my liking. So those are my issues with the deck. And like you said, all the slots are kind of necessary. So I don't know if those issues are really fixable. It's more like you make your peace with those, and if you think the rest of the deck has enough going for it, which I can see why you would, then you just roll with it anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. You said you had played against it a lot, but not necessarily with it.
Against it, not with it. Yeah.
Okay. I think there's a lot of, I don't know if everyone is quite approaching it right. There's a lot of like acceptance of the fact that you are setting up for a turn 3 or like a turn 4 setup. And you are just like, you just like don't cast spells a lot with this deck, because you're like, even more so than with Arclight Phoenix, like your entire goal, like the original Phoenix decks, like you'd sometimes hold spells, but like you had enough cantrips. Nah, that doesn't happen here so much. Like there's a lot of times you probably shouldn't have cast a turn 1 cantrip, because you just like need to be sure that on turn 3 you go like EOT salvaging, and then it comes back on your upkeep. and then like you Morphos into like a prismatic ending for 2 and like a spell, and then you play all your things. So I think that there's a lot of ability to just like take game actions when you shouldn't with this deck. I also will note that like the turn 3 thing, like a lot of this deck is like, I am going to cast Faithful Salvaging at a specific point on their end step because I am going to immediately untap and utilize that cast. I think that's like a really important aspect of the deck.
Yeah, I think it's the most counterintuitive aspect too, because we're so ingrained to use our mana efficiently whenever possible, and the idea of just not casting a Thought Scour is, it takes some training to get over that muscle memory, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, I like the deck a lot when it's doing its thing, and I don't like the deck when my opponents are doing the thing that makes me not do my thing. Is really just my general
It may be a victim of his own success in so far as if all of these different Faithful Mending decks, and we'll get to the second one here in just a second, if they do become popular, then you will see people starting to really load up on not just the incidental graveyard hate, but deliberate graveyard hate in a way that makes these decks, have to face an uphill battle more of the time. Let's get to that second deck then here, because we've seen some of these Reanimator shells doing well in the past, and the other name on this list here, Aspiring Spike, was someone who was experimenting with this more controlling Esper Reanimator approach before Faithful Mending came out, and that card was Mana from Heaven for that strategy. And so we saw Spider Space, another name who we often see featured in the Nonsense of the Week segment as almost like a staging point, and then before long, the deck is no longer nonsense, it's everywhere, and you have to respect it if you're playing a Modern tournament. And so the latest breakthrough there is this deck. It's Esper Reanimator with no... there are a few lists floating around. This list, I want to confirm here, from the Saturday...
Yeah, so the Saturday challenge list is like heavy Archon of Cruelty, 1 Serra Emissary to find, 4 Thoughtseize, 4 Counterspell, 4 Persist, 4 Unmarked Grave. You can also find an Unburial Rites, and then you're just like, consider Faithful Mending, and am I forgetting anything else? I'm trying to remember if there's any other cards.
I think that's everything. Yeah, and consider... Sure.
Prismatic Ending.
Consider also a big pickup for this deck, and in a way, it's almost more important here than it is in the Phoenix deck, where with Phoenix, you have enough ways to shift cards between zones that, if a Phoenix ends up in your hand, you can probably find a way to ditch it at some point. Whereas with the Reanimator deck, you don't have that much redundancy on exactly Faithful Mending. And so if you consider and you see an Archon of Cruelty, let's say, and you get to surveil, in air quotes, that into the graveyard, that actually is like a very meaningful game action that you just took there to set up your persist on a later turn. So this deck, I think, does have a lot going for it. It reminds me in some ways of the very old school Scapeshift decks, where you would play this combo control style game, and you would survive the early turns, and you would end up ahead and filter through a bunch of cards. But then if you just didn't draw your namesake card, sometimes you would be spinning your tires and not actually accomplish anything. And the same thing is true here with Persist, where this deck can do a lot of things, and it's quite flexible, and it's not as one-dimensional as some of these other Reanimator decks. Ultimately, though, if you don't resolve with Persist, or I guess the one copy of Unburial Rites, it's going to be very difficult to win the game. And that's the big sticking point here is, you don't have enough redundancy, I think, to embrace that, and you don't have enough card filtering. I mean, Faithful Mending and Consider do help, but you can't rely on having that card, especially in the face of disruption, as often as you might want to, I think.
Yeah. I think you've encapsulated the issue with this deck very well, it's slightly unreliable. Like your nut draws where you just have like turn 2 Grave, turn 3 Persist, you Thoughtseize them on 1. It's just like Archon is unbeatable in those spots. But you do have issues when you just don't draw the Persist in time. The thing that I think this deck has going for it, we kind of touched on this when I was talking about the issues with Phoenix, is that with 4 Thoughtseize and 4 Counterspell, you do have a lot of generically flexible answers. In my experience playing this deck has been that the vast majority of the time I'm allowed to play like the exact game I want to, and be like a true combo control deck, which you really need those specific cards to do. Like, you need to be able to counterspell like either a hate card or a threat. And the same thing with any thoughts.
It is rare to see a deck that both wants and supports Thoughtseize and Counterspell at the same time. You saw it in, I guess, like the Grixis Ragavan decks, where sometimes you would have your Thoughtseize Inquisition and then Drown at the Lock as a Counterspell, removal spell, split card. But that's firstly much easier on the mana to do it that way, and also made sense with how the rest of that deck was constructed. I wonder if here you almost want to pick a lane and lean more into that. So maybe you want to be a more tap out deck where, I don't know if Priest of Felrise is something you want as redundancy, but some other way to reanimate your stuff, and then maybe more discard stuff like that. Or to play the more reactive game with Counterspell and maybe more instant speed interaction to supplement your Faithful Mendings. I don't know if the deck is versatile or confused. I think that's a very fine line.
I would really categorize it as versatile. I think being all discard leaves you open to, like, this is a deck that actually wants its opponents to sink mana into things and punish them for doing that. Both like on the reanimation side and like after. I guess the other thing I forgot to point out was that this deck is a Teferi deck, and you want to be able to set up and protect that card on like both sides. You really do work your opponents over in the fair game because you have Thoughtseize and Counterspell. And I think you would be one of the things. I have utilized Teferi's +1 with this deck a lot. There's a lot of draw step Thoughtseizing people, and I think that you really do get the most out of all of your cards with this deck, the way it's constructed. And I wouldn't want to deviate too far from that. The thing that I actually would want to look at the most is that you don't have a ton of interaction, and sometimes your opponents can just like produce a lot of stuff, and you don't have a lot of cards that let you come back from that, aside from like actually getting an Archon through multiple times or whatever. And I wouldn't mind seeing a couple copies of some sweeper.
Yeah, this somewhere. Is all one for ones, right? It's Thoughtseize, Counterspell, Prismatic Ending, and just anything that slips through or that generates multiple cards could be an issue. And actually, this is a deck which I think does have to be concerned about Urza Saga coming back, right? Where, like, you can't Thoughtseize, you can't Thoughtseize it, you can't Counterspell it, you can't, I mean, I guess you can Prismatic Ending a construct, but then that thing is making 2 threats, which you have to answer individually. And then it's finding a Nile Spellbomb or whatever to code your main persist game plan. So that seems like a pretty big issue that we have to grapple with at some point. I guess the question I would ask is, despite what I said about consider letting you high roll sometimes, is that actually an effect you want in this deck? Could those slots be used more efficiently? Because it seems like if you're trying to line up your endings and Thoughtseizes and Counterspell against your opponent's threats, you're not always going to have 1 mana, and especially 1 blue mana lying around in your deck, which, you have River of Tears, which is a little shaky sometimes. You've got like a basic Plains, basic Swamp, Mystic Gate, and so on. Just the idea of having 1 blue mana lying around is not free. That's not trivial by any means. And given that you're trying to do something very specific, having this marginal form of card selection maybe is not the best use of those slots.
Yeah, I kind of want better card selection, but I want to push back on the issue. You're saying that you don't have this mana lying around, and I think that you actually do, and it's because of the way the deck is so focused on things that cost 2 that you have a bit of the like Gyruda Obosh problem going on, where you're like trying to fill the curve on turns where you're trying to like play a 2-drop and like take another game action with your floating like 3rd mana. So Consider often kind of fits in there. I do wish it was better than Consider, like you could have a better card, but the fact that it's an instant also like helps you spend Counterspell mana that would be wasted otherwise. So yeah, I haven't high rolled anyone yet with it where you just like turn 1 Consider and then turn 2 Persist or whatever. Like that setup has never happened for me, but it's acceptable, but I don't think it's great. So I think it works It's less of an issue than you're saying it is, but it's also just not
I don't mean so much not having one mana lying around as having the wrong one mana lying around. So the hands where you have like a Swamp, Faithful Mending, and so on turn 3, you have a Swamp that's just chilling, not doing anything. Or the Plains Counterspell draws where you end up not being able to cast Counterspell and consider it in the same turn, for example. Just it seems like when those situations occur, they're already going to be awkward, and not being able to use your mana efficiently just exacerbates that even further.
Yeah, okay. Those are issues that do pop up. It's less than you think it is, because I know you mentioned river tiers, but a lot of your like effects that would be taxing your blue mana happen on your opponent's turn, so that's not a huge deal. But the games where you're like trying to manage your life total, it does come up because you're trying to like fetch a Plains or a Swamp, or I guess manage against blood.
Yeah, the card that gets suggested once again in Twitch chats over and over is Gifts Ungiven for like the actual one card combo fail here, where it's a lot of mana. It is a lot, but I wonder if, given that you do need to actually reanimate something to win a game, if having that very expensive guaranteed 1-2 punch in the same card is worth it there.
I would rather play Factor.
Sure,
Fiction.
I mean that honestly that might not be the worst
I just
idea.
want. No, I don't think it's horrific to play like 1 or 2 Factor Fiction on the high end here. There's room to fiddle with that. If I know we've talked about Archon of Cruelty before, but I really want to like impress to people that like that card is messed up. I played a lot of games with this deck where like they would just exile my first Archon, but just like the accumulated resources of like sack a creature, discard a card, I draw a card, drain life, like, they just lost anyways. There was just enough of a buffer on like every axis that the game continued another 3 turns and they never did anything else.
I guess I do worry in like longer games against blue-white, for example, where they can maybe, they've cast a Memory Deluge or something, they've gone up on cards, which again, this deck kind of has trouble doing, and then you kind of get all of that back with the first Archon, but then that gets solituded or something, and you don't really have anything left over again.
That's, I think, where the Thoughtseize and Counterspell stuff really comes in. You get a lot of flexibility to pick your spots in that matchup. I'm not saying it's like a great matchup, and it probably gets bad if they prepare, but if they're not really targeting you, I think you can get away with a lot of fiddly maneuvers. It's a pretty classic, like, your cards all cost 1 and 2, and their cards often cost more.
Yeah, so those are the Faithful Mending decks that did well, unless I'm missing another one that snuck in there and escaped unnoticed. But do you see any other obvious homes for that card popping up?
Not off the top of my head. The problem is that you have to be a very specific band of like, you have to be sort of fair because you're spending 2 mana on it. And like, you can't really like, I know like Storm has played Faithful Saluting in the past. You can't really do that with this card because you're spending 2 whole mana, which is basically a whole turn. So you want to be fair, and it like prompts you to want to buffer your life total. And like, you also want to be sort of combo-y because you're throwing away cards. So you really have to be like right on that combo control edge that these decks are. I think that there's a way to build a like Azorius Control deck that is also like a Murktide Regent deck that wants it with like, I don't know what the other recursive threat or something like Graveyard Active would be. But there's maybe something in that space.
That sounds interesting, but I wouldn't have anything to offer on how to fill that out. So yeah, maybe that's just an interesting idea that's doomed to remain in that space.
Yeah, I'm sure that there's enough, monkeyless monkeys, banging on their non-Ragavan keyboards, and they'll make it happen. I'm more interested, as opposed to homes for this deck, in like figuring out what the next level exploit to people figuring this out is, because I've talked praises about Reanimator. We've said had our grievances with both lists. I would like to talk about what like beats both of these decks, because they do feel extremely
I think Urza Saga honestly is the level 1 answer to that, and maybe that's where Amulet Titan kind of creeps into the mix, where I would actually love to be the Amulet deck facing off against Phoenix here, I think, where back in the day, early 2019, that was a matchup where I think Amulet was favored for the most part, and it was so much slower and so much clunkier back then, and had to worry about sideboard Blood Moon, which this Jeskai version can't really afford to play in the same way. And you were facing fully powered Phoenix with Faithless Looting and Thing in the Ice back then, as opposed to this maybe more resilient but much slower, more interactive version. So yeah, maybe just going over the top like that is the way to go there. Also, just big mana in general. So something like Tron, for example, with a bunch of main deck Relic Progenitors sounds like an absolute nightmare, certainly for Phoenix and maybe for Reanimator too.
Yeah, I can see, if you look at the Reanimator sideboard, there's like a Terrason and a Void Winnower to try to mitigate some of those things. But I really like the idea of both of those decks trying to defeat these. I think that very specifically you would want to be Amulet playing against these. I don't think you want to be like Hardened Scales. I think I mentioned this with the Jund deck playing against Phoenix, but you want to be the deck that it's like, oh, I have to board in Wear Tear in this matchup. That's not great. And I guess Amulet Wear Tear is like live anyways because of the amulets themselves. But like you put a little strain on that. And again, Tron, like there's just not like, one of the decks has Alpine Moon, the other has Spreading Seas, but like there's not a ton going on both sides to try and defeat that. So I think that is going the right direction. I am one of the decks that I thought of. I mean, the other Urza Saga deck would be Mono White Hammer. I think that deck would be pretty good against both of these. I think that Esper Sentinel is just like a giant fiasco for both of these decks. The only issue I think that the Pure Steel Paladin deck has is that if the Reanimator deck gets to actually execute their like good plan where they go, Unmarked Grave into Persist, you do lose to an Emissary on creature.
Yeah, that is a big issue. You do get to just twin people a lot of the time. I found with the more proactive Reanimator decks that, yeah, sometimes Hammer could overwhelm an Archon, but if the Archon was early enough and you had your one or two things to back it up with, then usually you could just about cross the finish line there. But it was tougher than you'd think given how good Archon is and how mopey some parts of the Hammer deck are. You see how powerful that deck can be when all of its parts come together. I think one card that the Esper deck should look into is Dark Blast, actually, where in these matchups where your opponent has either Ragavan DRC, and so you need to be able to pick off 1-drops time and time again. This is one card that lets you do that. And then against Hammer, Kill Sentinel can pick off a bunch of other stuff. But then also it is a kind of a enabler of sorts for your Persist, right? It dredges you very quickly towards Archon, and especially in conjunction with Faithful Mending, you can just tear through a bunch of your deck if you have the Persist rolled up. So that's something I might explore there. I do wonder if, bearing in mind, if Saga is good against some of these new decks, and also Saga is great against Control, is there a Control deck that can play Saga?
I think we've been down this road and they all look kind of mopey on that like first turn. The problem that you run into is that like making 2 3/3s for like 2 turns of tapping out and getting one thing is like fine, but it really starts to turn the corner when you add another artifact to the mix. And then you're starting to be like, can I build a control deck? I mean, you might want to look back at we've talked about this a long time ago. This was the like Luris control deck. If you remember, like the Sultai,
Charlie the Banana King, yes.
Even before that, there was an Aspiring Spike Brew
yeah.
I was thinking of that was like this was bring to lighting for Valky, and casting it that way. I don't really know about all those old plans, but I am interested in like maybe if you want to be that Luris deck, you could be like a Luris control deck that's like, I guess we could go down the Banana King route, and Luris with Ren and 6 and blue cards and never cast our things ever. But I think you really need to be like Luris bobbling alongside your Urza Saga.
I guess what I'm thinking more is, instead of, let's say, the Shark Typhoons or whatever that you see in some of these blue-white decks, if Saga is your finisher of sorts, you're not cutting into your lands, maybe you're cutting into some of the spell slots instead, you just get to play this amazing finisher for the control modes, which is conveniently another land drop that you also get to hit, which in the more linear matchups, like this becomes your plan now. You just play this early, you get your Relic or your Needle or whatever it is on turn 3, and then just turtle up behind that with Counterspell, with Archmage's Charm or whatever for the rest of the game there.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense that way, I guess. I honestly don't even register Shark Typhoon in these decks most of the time. It's just like, I don't get why it's there. But yes, Urza Saga is probably
I also
a better
think
Shark Typhoon than that.
it pairs really nicely with Chalice there, where that curve of turn 2 Chalice on 1, turn 3, you threaten to start making constructs. Those constructs now can't be shot down with stuff like Unholy Heat, and also the Chalice is pumping the constructs when they come out, so you're actually assembling a pretty formidable board presence there.
Yeah, I mean, you do have some of the classic, like, your deck has Mishra Bauble and Chalice in it, and, like, 1-drops and Chalice at the same time, but if you're casting Chalice, you don't really care too much in the end, because it's going to shut down.
Yeah, so maybe not that exact shell, but I think if you can find other good Urza Saga decks, that might be something to look into. In that vein, I know that Neoform Affinity has actually been popping up from time to time in some of the prelims this week. I don't know how strong or consistent that deck is necessarily, and I would look at, if the name of the game here is Neoform, do I want redundancy there via something like Eldritch Evolution? But if you're looking at another good proactive Saga deck, maybe that's a space worth exploring.
I have no reps with or against that deck, so I can neither confirm nor deny anything you're saying. I have looked at it, I accept that it exists, and you've now given me...
It exists in the same way that any of the decks that 5.0 Modern League exist, as far as I can tell.
Hey, that 4.0 to prelim, that exists a little bit more. I would like to shout out Burn as a deck that I think probably really messes up Phoenix and it's probably a lot worse against Reanimator. I'm not going to lie, like Archon and Sarah Embassy are problems. But if you're going to play against Phoenix, I mean, I know that I specifically played, there was a RPTQ online or something like that, where I qualified by playing Burn into a field of Phoenix with the expectation that I was just going to idle on and burn my opponents out. And it was great.
And this was, again, a version of Phoenix that was much sleeker and much faster. Didn't have to muddle up its mana base for a third color. So yeah, I can see why that would appeal. The card Faithful Mending, if you have time, is obviously pretty nice against Burn, but you can't just look at a hand with Faithful Mending and think, oh, well, this is life gain, so I'm set, right? You do actually have to be taking meaningful actions and not taking a bunch of damage from your own mana base in the meantime.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, you gain 2 life, but then you pay 2 life for the Sacred Foundry or Hallowed Fountain to cast it.
Yeah,
so
you're treading water, I guess, in a matchup where you really, really cannot afford to be doing that.
Yeah, taking a 2-mana do-nothing action probably seems like the worst thing you could do in that matchup. Just if you're going to play Burn, don't play the stupid Ragavan Death Ray or Dragon Ray Shallow version. Just don't do that.
That being said,
Whatever
from the Reanimator side, it is such a nice flex against Burn where you get to just Thoughtseize yourself on turn 1, and both players immediately know exactly what that has to mean.
Yeah, Burn does not defeat.
You see, you're taking 2,
we'll
but then the next turn you're gaining 3, so you're winning all of it back.
Well, they also had to discard a card, which is like gaining another 3, and then they sack a creature, which is like gaining another half a life. The math just keeps adding up.
Yeah,
that is how
Philosophy
cool
of Fire, or whatever it's called. With that in mind, do we have anything else before we move into some more experimental territory here?
I don't think so. I expect to see these decks popping up, but respect them. Oh, play Surgical Extraction. That's all I got. I don't think either of these decks.
That is a very good call. And with that note, we'll be back with some less proven decks here after a short break. Don't go anywhere.
The SCG Tour Online is back. Starting Friday, July 23rd, you can play the best events in competitive Magic for thousands of dollars in cash prizes, piles of MTG Arena gems, MTG Arena qualifier invitations to skip that mythic grind, and at the very top, invitations to the MTG Arena Championships and the StarCityGames.com Invitational returning to Roanoke, Virginia from October 29th to October 31st. You heard that right, the SCG Invitational is also back, and you know the best place to qualify for it? That's right, the SCG Tour Online. Check out StarCityGames.com/SCG Tour Online to register for events. See upcoming event schedules and get all the details on how you can earn prizes and invitations playing the SCG Tour online.
All right, so Nonsense of the Week does beckon here, but before that, in the notes, we do want to touch on Champion of the Parish quickly, because this is a card which I think we both wanted to be good in Modern, and which I still think can be good in Modern, but it's going to take a little bit of time to iron out the right shell here, and it may be that the context of the format right now just is not conducive to this card seeing any play.
Yeah, I've run into this deck. I specifically ran into guest of the show Doomwake playing this deck when I was playing Mono Red Eldrazi. And I will say that Fury is a ginormous issue for this deck, and I do not want to be like involving myself in that heads up at any time soon. And I think that Fury is pretty high up, like between Elementals, Mono Red Eldrazi, and I guess there's Teamer Cascade floating around, but like that's 3 pretty big decks that are all pretty heavy on Fury, and that's kind of a problem. But the Gravecrawler plus Goblin Bombardment setup was really, really good.
Yeah, that combination by itself. I had Goblin Bombardment. I wrote about various zombies decks and tribal in general for my article this week, and I had a Rally the Ancestors version of zombies, which was just in black-white, but you could touch red there for bombardment, and that version did want additional sacrifice outlets, so maybe that's something it should be doing. And then I also had various mono-red versions. So there was one that was modeled on an idea you had a while back of splicing in the undying creatures with Yoggmoth, because you have 2 undying zombies in mono-black, and so at that point, the rest of the deck kind of built itself. And then also the Liliana Untouched by Death Shambling Ghast version, where you want the sacrifice outlet there, and Goblin Bombardment more than happy to oblige. And a lot of those combos, I hadn't really got to stress test them yet. I was not too optimistic about most of those shells, but it felt like the Bombardment Gravecrawler stuff just by itself was enough of a draw to, the zombie core that maybe you just cut the cute conditional stuff and just focus on that as hard as possible.
Yeah, Doomwake had a Mayhem Devil. That did not seem like a real card, but the rest of it was pretty good. Other cards that did not seem exceptionally exciting, Jadar Nephalia Ghoulcaller.
Yeah.
I don't really like paying 2 mana for stuff. Champion of the Parish, I would endorse. Gravecrawler, good. Crypt Breaker, good. I'm just going to keep naming cards that cost 1. I think the Undead Augur stuff is probably very much the right direction.
Yeah, I don't know. So I think if you're playing zombies, you probably should be playing Undead Augur. I think that's part of the point, but I don't know how good that stuff actually is. Like, is that getting you... If your entire board is dying to Fury, I guess if you have Augur in play, you get to immediately refuel, but that doesn't even feel like you've accomplished that much most of the time, especially if you're under pressure. I do think if you're looking for an aggro deck that gets to play Cavern of Souls, then zombies might be just a ticket there.
Yeah, that is another good Cavern of Souls deck. I think with the Undead Augur thing, it's less like, yeah, I'm going to lose myself to Fury and draw a card. It's more that I want to be able to Augur and then do some stuff to cash in for value in advance, so that even if I get Furied, I'm like ahead on the exchange, not even just off of the cards I draw when my things die.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I guess this is just another thing where I'm saying I like Gravecrawler Bombardment. Also, Gravecrawler Carrion Feeder. Just Gravecrawler, just really good.
Yeah, that card, we know from the Hogak days just how messed up that one can be, but good to have the reminder there. Other homes for Memory Deluge, perhaps. I know we spoke about Wilderness Reclamation in passing last week. Aspiring Spike, of course, streaming that today, seemed to be fairly happy with the initial iteration there, so maybe something worth exploring, but I'm not quite sure how well that lines up against the rest of what the format is doing. And even in the Blue Mirrors, where you would think being the deck with a bunch of Deluges and Shark Typhoons is where you want to be, I don't know if going up against Teferi and Dovin's Veto, I don't know if you actually end up on the good end of that.
Yeah, I think that the modern decks, like, it feels like you're trying to play the matchups that you did in Standard, but like, I don't think you're really undercutting them in any way, and they have Teferi to be the problem card. It's kind of dicey. Also, having played against Azorius, I'm not, I see a lot of these decks that have a ton of Memory Deluge. I'm not convinced you want all of them over Fact or Fictions. I'm not 100% sure that like my opponents have cast Deluge and they get 2 cards and like it's 2 answers, but like if I'm grinding them down, like they're often in a spot where like having 3 physical cards might be better.
I could see that. I've run into spots where I feel like I can weather the first card draw effect, especially if my deck is built to grind, but eventually when we're both on MD, the sheer inevitability of, well, they're just gonna dig through time from their graveyard and now I can't possibly win. Like that really has felt like it's warped the game around itself. So maybe you're meant to have a split even. I don't know. Like Fact or Fiction revealing a Deluge seems kind of unbeatable in those circumstances too.
Yeah, I was going to say the thing that I miss the most of the Fact or Fiction is like when you Deluge into Deluge, like you're really just spinning your wheels and spending a bunch of mana to do nothing. When you Fact or Fiction into Fact or Fiction, like something's going to go horribly wrong for your opponent. Like the way they just don't have splits that work out, and you're going to end up with like an actual Cascade of card advantage just because Fact or Fiction is worth the extra half a card to a full card.
Mm-hmm. One other card that I actually forgot to talk about in both my top 5 for the website and then also in our preview podcast here was Slogurk, the Overslime. So this is a 1 green blue 3/3 trample. Whenever a land is put into your graveyard from anywhere, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. You can remove 3 +1/+1 counters to return it to your hand, and whenever it leaves the battlefield, you return up to 3 lands from your graveyard to your hand. So I don't have a clear home in mind for this yet, and I think initially, this is the excuse I'm going to make for myself. It had so much random text for such a good rate that I almost assumed it was just one of those commander cards in the precons that come alongside the set. But I don't know, there's a lot going on here. And it feels like some part of this should be highly exploitable in some way.
You were just on a long call with Jarvis. You could have asked him all day about Slogurk. He is the lands master, you know. Everyone show up there and just ask Jarvis about Slogurk.
Yeah, so that's twitch.tv/JarvisU or at JKU06 on Twitter. Please be sure to ask him about Slogurk and tell him Ari sent you. But
yes,
so I've seen people brew around this with stuff like Ayuda's Influence. So this is the green Seismic Assault analog from MH1 where you discard a land to make a 2/2 bear and you can fit the pieces together there by yourself. I think a lot of that hyper specialized stuff is not really where you want to be. Like it's cool when you get to do the thing and it's incredibly fun to watch, but I don't know how consistently you actually get to do that. But I think there are a few possible homes for this. So firstly, just in some 4-color like Renin 6 to Fairy Time Raveler deck with Omnath and so on, this card pairs very well with Renin 6. They're kind of both wanting you to do the same kind of thing. And those decks just want another good cheap threat and good payoff for the late game, and Slogurk really fits in very nicely there. The other home that maybe came to mind was with Urza Saga. Like if you're looking for an Urza Saga deck where this is, with Saga in the mix, you get to return a good threat when your Slogurk leaves play. And keep in mind, this is whenever it leaves. It doesn't have to die or there's no conditionality to it. And when you bounce itself, you get that effect too. So this gives you a kind of inevitability as the game goes along that most decks would kill for, and especially with Saga there too. But the other thing is Saga can fetch Zuranor, which can let you just shove all in on your Slogurk to grow it to gigantic proportions, and also sacrifice specific lands so that when the Slogurk dies or you're bouncing it yourself, you get to just return whichever lands you want for another use again. And then I don't know if you work Titania in the mix here as like your top end thing with Zuranor, with Saga. Maybe you're a Dryad deck and you're building towards Valakut. I don't know exactly where you're going from there, but it seems like something in that space is worth a look.
Yeah, I certainly believe you on all of that. My question is how are you staying alive to cast all these 3 and 4 drops cards? And I think that the answer is partly that Slogurk has good colors. You know, it's blue and green, and those are 2 colors that you want to pitch things to do stuff. And this sounds like a deck that probably could get away with that. I don't know if you want to be doing any like loam cycling land stuff either. So there's a lot of stuff to work out.
Yeah, maybe you have a few loams. You're not like a dedicated loam deck, but a bunch of cycling lands, especially if you're a Renin 6 deck, that feels somewhat free. Then And that's actually one thing that I found with the various Ren and 6 to Fairy decks that we dissected, feels like ages ago now, where a lot of the time you would have an active Ren for a few turns and have a 7-card hand, but 4 or 5 of those cards would be lands, and you still felt like you were short on action. And yeah, you had Triomes, but you don't want to be spending your entire turn cycling and then picking that back up, and just having a 1-drop cycling land to make Ren and 6 into an actual Howling Mine felt like it would go a long way there. So that's already something you had some interest in, and now Slogurk just gives you an added incentive to do that.
It sounds like we need to send this card back in time to PTLA 2005 and let the people there work with it.
I think if you could send a lot of people back in time to that Pro Tour, they would do a lot of things differently. The Dredge mechanic perhaps could have explored that one further. But yeah, maybe this is just a thing you do at the commander table, but it feels like, there were so many words on this card, right? That's a good precedent.
Yeah, they've been doing a lot of that thing where they put a lot of words onto a legendary creature and then oops, it's playable in every format. So I don't see anything wrong with that.
It has the lethal mana cost of 1 blue-green, which has, been a bad omen in the past. And it's so hard to kill this thing. And eventually, late game, let's say you're against the Zuma Jun deck or some blue-white control deck, you can almost set up like a shield for this, where you have a few fetch lands in play, you play Slogurk, and now if they try to remove it, you sacrifice your fetch lands, get your counters, return it, get all the fetch lands back, or other lands as well. And then if they don't kill it, or even if they do, let's say their Solitude or whatever goes off, you just draw 3 cards. And if you can convert that into good resources, maybe with Faithful Mending, I don't know, then it's almost impossible to be down on cards when your Slogurk dies, however that ends up happening.
I'm here for this being a Faithful Mending deck. That makes a lot of sense to me as another graveyard oriented deck. I kind of want to talk about another card that we mentioned a few times in the context of Faithful Mending, because it's kind of almost married to that card. And it's weird that it's not seeing more play, and that's Consider. I know I mentioned last week that it kind of has the wrong types for is it Murktide decks, but it feels like someone would have at least tried to go down this road, and I don't think I saw a lot of Consider anywhere besides the Mending decks.
I guess the question there is, what is there a deck that wanted Opt before where this would just slot in naturally, or do you think that pairing Consider with something else is enough of an upgrade to create a new deck or revive an old one?
I don't have a good answer there. I guess there was not a ton of Opt showing up before. It just feels like Consider is it's an Opt and a half, right?
I guess. There are some decks where Opt and Consider are functionally identical for the most part. In Modern, there are enough graveyard synergies that usually there's something going on, even if it's just pairing up your Snapcaster Mage, for example. But yeah, you would think there would be more Consider decks. I don't think that people are actively rejecting the card. It's just, the decks that they happen to be playing already just don't have a home for it.
Yeah, maybe we'll just wait and we'll see where it settles on that. That's kind of the kind of card that you just it does what it does and you don't move it. It's not exciting. No one looks at Consider as ooh, I'm going to build something new with this. It's just this is a blue card, and people work it out over time. One last card that costs a single blue as well is Otherworldly Gaze. This is the sort of Dream Twist. It's basically blue, surveil 3, look at your top 3, mill any of them, put the rest on top, and then has flashback 1 in a blue. This showed up in Dredge over Shriekhorn in, I want to say a league dump, but one of those various results. And I'm not sure I agree with that, but I do like the idea of some amount of it in that deck for kind of this purpose.
Yeah, I think I wrote this card off as having what I'll call deck Facebook group syndrome, where, whenever a new card that has the word graveyard on it comes out, there will be a bunch of people who really should know better because the one deck they play in Modern is Dredge, saying, hey, looks like Dredge got a new toy. But I think this time it maybe actually did. Because that one thing I found in my brief and unsuccessful experiments with Dredge was you would have to keep a lot of one-landers where you were you maybe had an enabler on one, whether it's Shriekhorn or Haggled or whatever the scraps you were forced to play at the time were. And even if you like hit a Dredger off that, you couldn't really afford to Dredge because you then wouldn't have a land for your Reunion on 2 or whatever it was. And so having a card which does set that up while also dumping other stuff away, like maybe that is exactly the right combination of stuff to make this worth it as the kind of backup enabler, so to speak.
Yeah, I think backup is the right way to describe this because I don't want it over my Ox of Agonis's as the thing I do once I start dredging, because it literally just says like dredge 3 for 2 mana, which is bad. And I think Shriekhorn, it provides more cards for less investment in mana, but like having a little bit of both sounds nice. I wouldn't mind a 5th Shriekhorn that's also like a 5th Ox of Agonis.
And hey, we mentioned wanting to look for an Urza Saga deck, and as per last week's Nonsense of the Week segment, Dredge can be an Urza Saga deck, apparently. So maybe something to consider.
Yeah, maybe you can full on Slogurk, Faithful, Mending, Dredge, Otherworldly Gaze. Just shuffle all the cards together and then put Yorion in your sideboard and it'll all work out.
Look, all I'm saying is Slogurk and the Gitrock monster work perfectly together, and there's something there to sink your teeth into. But that is fuel for a future Nonsense of the Week segment, hopefully, if I can get 5-0 with that somehow. But in the meantime, we'll take a short break and come back with some real Nonsense of the Week. And I do mean real Nonsense of the Week. Alright folks, we're taking a brief time out here to talk about SCG Premium, and for the low price of just $7.99 a month, which is less than the cost of one collector booster, by the way, here's what you get. 5% off sealed product, 10% off singles, 15% off supplies, and that's everything from sleeves, deck boxes, to binders, and so much more. If you're making a big order to get ready for Paper Magic again, that month of premium just paid for itself. On top of that, you get more content and better content than anywhere else at the best prices. If you're here now with me and Ari and you like what you hear, you can get our weekly columns, but that's only the start. How about the literal world champion, and for my money, the best player of all time, Paolo Vido Damagerosa? How about Pro Tour champions and Mythic champions from Jerry Thompson to Autumn Burchett? We have the best standard player of all time, perhaps, in Brad Nelson, and the best limited mind in the game right now in Sam Black, and so much more. And if one piece of advice from any of us helps you win just one more round in a tournament, well, that month of premium just paid for itself many times over. Get the best discounts and the best content over at starcitygames.com/join-premium. All right, so to close this out here, we have a deck which is real in the sense that it did actually 5-0 a league, I believe, or did well enough that someone didn't feel ashamed about publishing it. But it doesn't look real to me. I'm not sure how this can actually exist.
Yeah, so this is the Twitter user 9th on Breakers, Eric Virgo, was, let me read off his self-described how he came to this deck. And let me dig this up because the description is something that I can't even like. I really want to use his exact words because it's got the right feel for this. I believe he said he wants to enjoy Modern by making terrible decks as good as possible. There we go. And attached to this tweet is a screenshot of a board state of the following creatures on the battlefield. There is a tapped Universal Automaton. Is that the name of the card?
Yes.
The 1 mana 1/1 Changeling. That's an artifact. There is a tapped Mirror Entity. There is a Sacred Foundry and a Breeding Pool, and attacking are a 2 Moth Dust Changelings, a Valiant Changeling, a Flame King Harbinger, and a Magda Brazen Outcast. Yeah.
So
that's the attack.
Yeah,
underneath the player wins the match screen.
Yes, this deck has to be seen to be believed, and I don't know if us just listing off what a bunch of different changelings do is going to enlighten people as to how this works. So we'd recommend looking at this deck for a holistic understanding here. But basically, the idea is you use changelings with Magda. So this is 1 and red. Whenever a dwarf you control becomes tapped, you create a treasure token, and then you can sacrifice 5 treasures to find either an artifact or a dragon from your deck. And this is a card which may be familiar to you from Standard, where it's you're tapping it to your Jaspera Sentinel or your Seeker's Chariot, and you're definitely going to get sick of that if you aren't already. But in this context, it's not just Magda, it's any dwarf. And so enter the 1-drop changelings from across the years. So not just the Universal Automaton. This is a 1-mana colorless, it's an artifact, 1/1 changeling from Modern Horizons, but also Moth Dust Changeling. So this is from the original Lauren. It's blue for a 1/1, and you can tap an untapped creature you control to give it flying. So you can tap itself to give itself flying. You can tap Magda. You can tap any of your other dwarves. And so if you assemble, let's say, turn 1 changeling, turn 2 Magda, you tap them both, you make 2 treasures. You untap, you play a third dwarf, third changeling, you tap all 3 of them, suddenly you're at 5, you can sacrifice those, fetch a dragon, fetch an artifact. So already you're kind of going off there. You can see the broad sketch of what's happening. But once we're doing that, well, we need to close out the game somehow. So what Eric settled on is we can find Valiant Changeling. This is the 3/3 changeling that costs 7, but it costs less for each creature type among creatures you control. So you can go turn 1 Moth Dust Changeling or Automaton into turn 2 Valiant Changeling because you have every creature type there. And because you have a 7-drop, you can use Neoform or Pyre of Heroes to turn that into Craterhoof Behemoths to pump up everything else you control and attack for a large amount of damage that way. We also have Springleaf Drum here, so drum tapping Magda, allowing you to cast another changeling on the same turn or fix your mana in your Magda Neoform Valiant Changeling deck. On top of that, we have Flamekin Harbinger, because it turns out if you need to draw specific changelings, well, those are also specific elementals, and Flamekin Harbinger can tie the room together there. On top of that, with Pyre of Heroes, so this is the riff on Birthing Pod from Kaldheim, costs 2, and you can upgrade a creature you control into a creature with mana value 1 higher that shares a creature type with it. So in the past, you're thinking, all right, well, in my humans deck, I'll look at all of the 2-mana humans and then the 3-mana humans, or maybe some of these are human wizards, so I'll see if there's a Vidalcan wizard or whatever. So a fun deck building puzzle there, to be sure. But in this deck, when your creatures are every creature type, well, you really get to go off there. So the Moth Dust Changeling can turn into Magda, or your Valiant Changeling can turn into Craterhoof Behemoth. So this is actually a functional Birthing Pod in this deck, which also allows you to play some hate cards. So this deck has a main deck copy of Sanctifier Onvec, which normally you would have to draw that thing for it to do anything useful. But here, you can Neoform a Changeling into it, or even a Harbinger, which isn't a Changeling, into it. You can Pyre of Heroes a Changeling into it, or you can just Ella Damage School for it and cast it the hard way if you're so inclined. So that's going to give you a nice bit of equity there against maybe some of the Persist decks or Arclight Phoenix decks that are showing up in the format right now. But this is just a truly wild piece of deck building, which I really admire. And then, moving over to the sideboard here quickly, we have 3 copies of Harmonic Sliver, which it turns out when you have a bunch of 1-drop slivers in your deck, you can just blow up a bunch of stuff. And also Risen Reef, which again, hey, Universal Automaton is an elemental. Flamekin Harbinger, I guess we already know is an elemental, but just to be sure, that one's an elemental. So in grinding matchups, you now have this engine where you have a bunch of 1-drops that all draw a card, and you just get to build your own Glimpse of Nature, I suppose. So there is a lot to unpack here, I believe, as the kids say.
I think the one thing you miss is that you have another combo way to generate a Craterhoof Behemoth. And that is just use those treasures for their intended purpose.
Well, that too. Yeah, you're building up so much mana of any color that you can just cast all of your spells, and that's fine. That'll get the job done.
Yeah, it's this deck is quite the work of art. I also really like that it's another Springleaf Drum deck that's not like an artifact deck. Springleaf Drum, I think, is a bit underrated, and I'm glad to see it getting more play across the board right now.
There is also a legacy version that I've seen featuring Dwarven Recruiter, which you don't get to play Goblin Recruiter in Legacy, and for good reason. But Dwarven Recruiter is A-okay, and I think started as a joke way back when, but now maybe it's still kind of a joke, but it's a good joke, and that's the key.
Was it a good joke? Like, you always knew what the punchline was going to be. I guess it's pretty good. I actually do enjoy that.
Well, hey,
never mind.
You do have time as your opponent is resolving their mega doomsday for 20 cards and taking 5 minutes to do it and still not getting a slow play warning to enjoy the majesty of what is about to happen to you. So there's that. The other deck, which we should mention, which not quite as nonsensical, but still highly nonsensical. This is actually a user-submitted nonsense of the week, which we definitely endorse. So by all means, tag us on Twitter at Dominharvia at ARMLX if you have managed to do well with anything suitably out of left field. This is 4-color Yorion Copycat Storm the Festival. I think that's about everything. Oh, with Fires of Invention as well. So the idea here basically is you have Storm the Festival. You want to be able to convert that into an immediate payoff. And so you have the Saheeli Rai Felidar Guardian combo, which you can hit both pieces, and that's Yahtzee. You have Solitude and Fury, which I think is, in some sense, we've seen that joke before, but the issue with these like bigger collected company effects has always been, you want to get the maximum yield on your mana there, but you can't really afford to play a bunch of 5-drops and 6-drops naturally in Modern. So having 5-drops which you can cheat into play by, I guess, pitching another uncastable 5-drop gets you around that problem. Or sometimes you can just use Fires of Invention to cheat the entire mana system and pretend it doesn't exist. We have 4 copies of Omnath Locus Creation in this deck, because why wouldn't we? It's a Ren and 6 Fairy Time Raveler deck as well. We have Ephemerate to pair with our Evoke Elementals and Omnath and so on. And then we have Storm the Festival just to spin the wheel, I suppose, and really see what we can hit there. If we hit Fires of Invention, then we get to go again sometimes, right? If we hit our 6th land in our fires and we've drawn another Storm, we just get to do that. Or next turn even, we have Omnath and we have a fetch land, so we make a billion mana and flash it back and go again. So lots of stuff going on here. And then to fit all of this in, we need to add some more cards. And from there, it's not too hard to get up to 80, at which point we get to play Yorion, which works very nicely with Felidar Guardian, Omnath, Solitude, Fury, Fires of Invention. We've seen all of those jokes before and more. We have my personal favorite Coalition Relic, which by itself gets you to 6 mana for Storm the Festival on turn 4 naturally, and I guess fixes your mana, which is a concern in here. So a lot going on here as well. And you love to see basically all of it, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, are you allowed to flashback off Fires of Invention? I
don't think you are, no.
You may choose to pay the mana cost or an alt. I'll have to look this up, but if you are allowed to, this makes a lot of sense and is some seriously good nonsense.
Yes. Maybe we could, I guess, fit a little more interaction into this deck. Don't quite need the full billion 4-drops, billion 5-drops thing. We do need to avoid dying somehow, but if you avoid dying, then you are off to the races.
Well, that's what you need, Yorion. That's how you get the right mix. Once you get up to 80 cards, it's all smooth.
Yeah, we've got some Sunset Referees in the sideboard here. We'll be fine.
Absolutely fine. I guess we didn't really talk a bit more about that card. Not really a ton to say. I mean, we mentioned it. It does its anti-aggro thing. I don't know if there's a ton to say about it beyond that, but yeah, good stuff, and definitely does that job very well.
Yeah, that
especially the 4-color mana bases, and you're subsidizing your, crack fetch, take 3 kind of life total going on there.
Yeah, that card is how you get to subsidize nonsense like this, because you can tell yourself, hey, it'll be fine. I'll just play a bunch of these. I'll gain some life. I'll make some creatures. It'll all be okay. And that fuels some wonderful art on the back end there. So you got to be thankful for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so that's going to do it for this episode. As always, not sure what we will be back in here next week, but rest assured, we will be back with more recent results and, of course, more nonsense of the week. Take care, everybody.